Hi class, this is Professor Benninghoff here. I hope you're hanging in there. I've got this assignment, the shortened research paper process, filling in, analyzing your sources forms, and writing umbrella introductions and conclusions. And I'm creating these walkthrough samples to show you how to do this. As you'll see in the assignment, I've got a link to the shortened version here that explains what you need to do. Our first step of this, you should read obviously the whole part of this. This first page lays out the plan for filling in 5 of these forms, 2 for Thursday and 3 for Sunday, and then from those writing your paper. The key things you'll want to do as you're developing these forms is thinking about how you're going to put the pieces together with an introduction and conclusion that cover the selection of pieces and the discussion with them. And also, before you start writing the final paper, be sure you look over the link to the Purdue University Online Writing Lab's sample MLA paper, which gives you a good idea of how to use the headings to break up your paper and organize it. But the purpose of this walkthrough right now is to get through how to use that form. So yeah, the final paper is due April 25th. Here's the explanation of how we're shifting our process, right, and talks about how to use the form. And here's what the forms look like, and you'll just go through the articles that you have for your project and fill in these bits, and from that you'll be able to then take it and very easily hopefully write the sections for each part of your paper as you go through. So the sample version that I'm going to do for you is from an article called "They Say Coronavirus Isn't Airborne, but It's Definitely Borne by Air." So I'm going to switch over to my annotated just to show you. Here's the article on wired.com, and it has what it looks like as a regular old article, and there are things that of course when you print it out don't show up, like so that's what it looks like there. So here's the article and the way I've marked it up. So the last assignment we did was asking people to catch a couple different things and notice how terminology plays an issue. What writers are doing when they write a piece is they're always establishing some reason for why they're telling us something. There's a difference between the way people usually think about something and the way the author wants people to think about something. And in this article, this one's very much about some particular terminology around infectious disease. And the experts, I'm going to try to give you the short version here, the people who do research, that this is their special area, they talk about whether a virus is airborne or not. And it's a weird little narrow differentiation. If the droplets that are coming out in somebody's breath are 5 microns or smaller, or below 5 microns, then they would call that aerosol, and it hangs in the air and it's very dangerous. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If it's greater than 5 microns, no, I got it right. If it's less than 5 microns, then it hangs in the air. If it's greater than 5 microns, then they think that the bits fall to the ground. And this is the way that our public health officials thought about COVID-19. So in this opening part, amid the hourly updates, the single calming fact, right, the germ, at least it isn't airborne. And what they've said for this is the droplets laced with the new coronavirus don't remain aloft for long, and they only sail for 6 feet. And so if we keep our 6 feet and we wash our hands, it's all fine. You're not going to get it from just stuff that stays in the air, right? And this was something they said over and over again. It isn't airborne. It isn't airborne. But the key part that the author points out here, whoa, all right, I'm looking at. But I'm afraid this standard line, the single calming fact about the new coronavirus, may not be as simple as it seems. When health officials say the pathogen isn't airborne, they're relying on a narrow definition of the term, and one that has been disputed by some leading scholars of viral transmission through the air. So the question isn't so simple, because a droplet, in theory, is still a droplet, whether it is 5 microns or smaller. So, and the way the public health officials have used this term, and if we get down to this part of it, the way the people who actually research this, right, they use 2 terms for these different sizes, right? So if it is smaller than 5 microns, then they call it an aerosol. Get down to this part, droplets versus aerosols. Droplets are larger than 5 microns. Aerosols are smaller than 5 microns. However, this black and white division between droplets and aerosols doesn't sit well with researchers who spend their lives studying the intricate patterns of airborne transmission. The 5 micron cutoff is arbitrary and ill-advised, and as Lydia Wuroiba at Massachusetts at MIT says, strictly speaking, aerosols are droplets too. When you breathe out or cough, you release bits of water mucus in a wide array of sizes, ranging from bigger, wetter ones to finer ones. All of these are droplets. The smallest droplets are called aerosols. So, with the most dangerous diseases, like crazy dangerous diseases, they were aerosols, and so people could be in a elevator and come into the elevator like hours later and still get infected, right? But with most of the ones that were based on droplets, if they were larger, well, then the stuff falls out of the air and it's not as dangerous. But our health officials, the problem is that it's not this black and white. There's a case somewhere in between, right? And it looks like coronavirus is in this somewhere in between space, because there's examples of people going to, for example, a choir in California. And so while the people weren't like touching each other or coughing on each other or anything like this, they were just in the same room singing. And there was enough transmission for people to catch it, a bunch of people to catch it. So this article is explaining, right, that this isn't so cut and dried. And one of these researchers, where's his name in here, Donald Milton, he was has been trying to get people to realize that the flu, the regular old flu, it's maybe not so cut and dried for that. So there's this example in the article where there were passengers trapped on a plane grounded on the tarmac for 3 hours. There was only one person who was sick, but within 3 days, 3/4 of the people on that plane showed symptoms of the flu. So the flu is generally not considered an aerosol thing. So this idea is that the ways that we've been thinking about transmission of viral disease isn't as cut and dried as people have been thinking. All right, so that's a short rundown. You can look through this PDF that I've marked up is in our files and is linked. So what I'm going to show you next is then how you fill in, right, the form. So here's the analyzing sources form filled in for this article. So you get the article title. They say coronavirus isn't airborne, but it's definitely borne by air. Here's the link to the actual article. The author's name and qualifications, Roxanne Comsey. She's a science writer and editor. Her articles appeared in publications such as The Economist, Popular Science, Scientific American. I had to do a little search on her name to find this short little thing which just says this person's published a lot. This has written a lot on these topics. When it was published, and then here are a list of several of the people that she references, right? So she's writing an article, but then she's referencing other people in that article and who those couple of those people are, right? Lydia Boruiba, an MIT fluid dynamics and pathogens researcher, Julian Tang, a virologist at the University of Leicester in England, and Donald Milton. So this gives you, right, other people that you're going to talk that are important to what that person's saying in their article. And then in that article, right, here I've distilled what are the questions this author is wondering about. So should our U.S. health policy folks be so certain or black and white about whether COVID-19 is airborne when researchers are not? And this is the basis of her article, right, is this question. Other key question in that, are terms like airborne and droplet so cut and dried or clear for epidemiology researchers? The answer, of course, is no. And if those questions are not so clear, what should change about coronavirus explanations to the public and public policy? Now, this last question, of course, is the thing that she's sort of suggesting. Her whole piece was pointing out that the researchers are saying it isn't that cut and clear, and so she doesn't say what the policy change ought to be, but as you've seen, we have really reversed our idea about people wearing masks, which suggests, right, if we're wearing masks, we're definitely doing things to try to prevent, make sure that it's 6 feet, fine, but the masks are keeping it to ourselves. And the thing about the mask policy, is that it's somewhat protecting yourself, but it's really protecting other people from you. Like, we're wearing them so that we don't spread it. So the next section in the form here is, what is the current thinking that these questions are digging into, right? And so how most people think about this topic or issue. And so this gives you the difference between the way people usually think and the way that the author wants people to think about these things. So it's setting up the normal that your research work is a response to. And many health policy experts treat the question of whether a virus is airborne with a simple rule of thumb. Droplets 5 microns or larger means it's not airborne. And it turns out that it's not as cut and dried as that. The infectious transmission researchers, many of these researchers, right, see the issues much more debatable in multiple ways. And then the general public does not know much about the spread of germs, and with different things playing this COVID-19 dangers as a hoax, it's been very slow for people to take this seriously, and so drastic ideas of social distancing seemed like an overreaction to people. But if the transmission of K19 or C19 is just somewhat airborne, then the whole understanding of what people need to do, what society needs to do, changes. And here we all are wearing masks like China and South Korea. right? So how most people, now I've kind of wandered off of here, but yeah, what was the general thinking, right? Then the next part here is, what are the key terms that these discussions are changing our understanding of? And so airborne, right, is the basic term we've used to say how a virus is transmitted. And it's unclear, right? We're sort of setting up a middle ground between what was a simply yes, it's airborne, or no, it's airborne. And what this article is suggesting is, there's probably a middle space. Droplet is like a key term in this about things that are larger or smaller than 5 microns. And aerosols when they're smaller than 5 microns. These are some of the key terms that are being debated in the article. There are more terms. I just put these 3 in there. Then what evidence is being gathered? Well, the people who are testing this are testing how the germs move. So they're somewhat sampling air, and then they're somewhat sampling like surfaces for germs like vents and different things in hospitals or other places. How it's gathered? Well, they don't really say this, but they must somehow have a way to vacuum up these teeny tiny dust particles and analyze it for the virus. And then how it's interpreted. One of the key things that they point out in the article, if I switch back over to here, is they talk about how let's see, here it is. So experiments designed to test hospital settings. So regular life conditions may behave differently. So there's ways that these are questions about the interpretation of the data, and that, right, there's been a few studies of this, but there haven't been enough studies to settle this. But there have been some studies which suggest, right, that very much it's this middle ground, and we seem to be acting on that now. Finally, at the end of the article, right, they talk about an interesting word to know in this one is this idea of a false dichotomy, where it's just a yes or a no. And the actual situation is more complicated than this, right? A false dichotomy is when something that is complex with multiple choices or options is presented as if there were only 2 options, right? And I can zoom in more so you can see that. Yeah, and so this false dichotomy, I'll go back to make it a little bit, right? So if we go back to the form, so once we go through the terms, so the interpretation of the data, what are qualifications to go with it? And then the last part of the form, what does the writer and the experts that they draw on think about the questions? And so this is where I'm trying to do a sort of summary. Like the experts she uses in the article, COMC thinks the question of whether COVID-19 is airborne is not a yes or no simple issue, because nature doesn't tend to follow simplified rules like greater than 5 microns or less than 5 microns fly exactly this far. It depends on a lot of different factors, as she talked about in the piece, like coughs and sneezes would propel things farther. And so, yeah, it's not as sort of simple as the CDC seemed to make it at first. So C19 is very likely more easily transmitted than the "it's not airborne" claim suggests. And Milton is saying this about the regular old flu, and this helps us realize, why is it that we are now wearing masks, and we're trying to be careful, and the social distancing is working, but an awful lot of people are getting sick, and an awful lot of people are dying. And this sort of idea of how transmissible and how it's transmitted, it would have been better to have understood this more beforehand. So this is how you fill in these forms, right? So that you can then go back to the assignment. Once you fill in 5 of these, then putting together the body of your paper will be discussing each of these different articles and talking about, in this case, so Roxanne Comsey, science writer at Wired and other magazines, discusses, and so you can lead into talking about what she says. If you're not writing this paper, obviously, but I'm saying that once you have these kinds of things, then it's easy for you to write up a summary to discuss what she discusses. So your research paper, the body of your research paper, will be tying together the multiple pieces that you've filled in this form about. So the first 2 of these are due Thursday night, so try to get your first 2 pieces together to get this form, and the form is in our it's linked into the assignment in multiple ways. There's a Google Doc version of that you can copy and paste into your own Google Doc. There's a Microsoft Word version of it that you can download and open in Microsoft Word, and fill that in for 2 of your own articles and submit those as PDFs or Word docs for this assignment. I'll be getting you more information on this as soon as I can. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing your pieces.